All right. So welcome to Dragon Tail Books. Thank you all for coming. And thank you, Amy Truesdell, for coming to talk to us about your great two great grandfather Rollin and his time in the Civil War and how you researched and wrote your book. So thank you so much for
Well,
coming.
thank you, Anne. I'm delighted to be here and very appreciative of this series. I think it's a really interesting concept. And thank you for coming out this evening to hear about my story, about bringing my great-great-grandfather's story to print. My book is an account of an intimate snapshot in time. It tells the story of the life-altering 2 years Rollin spent as a soldier in the Union Army. Rollin B. Truesdell was a hero. He was brave, astute, educated, and a character. This I had been told since I was a little girl. You see, my great-great-grandfather was a part of my life in the way a favorite uncle who sails around the world might be. I would never meet him, but the stories about his exploits and how he faced adversity made me understand that I was lucky to be a relation. Growing up, my father took pleasure and pride in describing the towering man who was Rollin. Rollin was a larger-than-life figure, not only due to his physical characteristics. He was a redhead and 6'1" tall when the average man's height was about 5'7", but also because of his ability to persevere, even as the world was crumbling under his feet. Dad told stories about the letters that Rollin wrote to his family from the battlefields and the army camps during the Civil War, and about Rollin becoming a successful businessman in his later years. Perhaps you can see why Rollin seemed like a celebrity in my family. Working on this book and eventually holding a copy in my hand was a goal fulfilled. For years, I dreamed of a time when I could work with my dad to transform his binders of Rollin's letters into a book. And I give you this background to offer context for the research and writing that I put into the book. The book exists because of Rollin and his words, his letters to the family. My job was to add the details around his letters to tell the story as I best understood it. A little bit more about Rollin. Rollin was the youngest of 6 children born into the tight-knit family of Lucy and Samuel Truesdell. They farmed in the rolling hills of Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania, in a town called Liberty, which is in the far northeast of the state along the New York state border. Rollin's grandparents, Samuel and Lucretia Truesdell, were among the first settlers of Liberty. They migrated from Connecticut in 1811 and laid claim to a vast tract of land in 1822. The deed for that land hangs on a wall in my home today.
Oh.
Rollin was raised in abolitionist territory, and his parents were abolitionist sympathizers, if not outright abolitionists themselves. In fact, anti-slavery sentiment in Pennsylvania dates to 1688, when the Society of Friends denounced it. Susquehanna County was known to be a safe haven for runaway enslaved people since as early as 1792. In a detail-rich letter, Rollin's sister Clara wrote in 1903, the year that she died, and she responded to my great-grandfather's query about what memories stood out for her about the Civil War. She included the following passage. The first things I heard talked over in childhood were events which led up to the war. My father was a lifelong friend of the slave, but never a violent abolitionist. My mother signed the first set of resolutions ever adopted at an abolition meeting in Susquehanna County, a marvelous thing for a woman to do at that time. Montrose, which is the Susquehanna County seat, was without doubt a station on the Underground Railroad, which helped so many slaves over the border. It was and is still a matter of pride that no fugitive slave was ever taken from Montrose. Some had narrow escapes, and I can myself remember seeing a well-known team passing our house one Sunday by a shortcut from Montrose to Big Bend. 2 women were the passengers. I heard my father say to himself, "They will just make the immigrant train on the Erie Road, and tomorrow morning, those women will be in Canada." Having this letter in my possession helped deepen my understanding about Rollin's fabric, about Rollin's roots. Rollin endured the most direct threat to the sanctity of the United States, the Civil War. At the age of 21, he left the family farm in Liberty, Pennsylvania, to enlist in one of the first regiments to form in the North, the 27th New York Volunteers. Rollin's gift for writing was recognized by his superiors. He served as company clerk and as regimental clerk at the very beginning of the war. Rollin served with distinction and rose to the rank of sergeant. As Rollin's sister Clara wrote in the same letter to my great-grandfather, Rollin left home a boy and returned home a man, just as so many on both sides of the conflict had. Switches.
Isn't it the downward,
The down arrow.
the down arrow? Oh, God. Something we said, I just remembering, I don't know any stories. I'm intrigued that your father, his stories were alive yet in your
Oh, yeah.
generation, like they were
Absolutely.
after all these 100 some years.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Okay. Unfortunately, I'll skip it back down. Oh, okay. Over the course of his 2-year commitment, Rollin was a prolific letter writer of the sorrow and bloodshed and camaraderie and glory he experienced as an infantryman in the Army of the Potomac. Derived from over 100 letters he wrote to family and friends in Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania, this is the story of my great-great-grandfather, Rollin B. Truesdell, answering the call to join the Union Army when the United States was teetering on the brink of collapse. The structure of the book. This is an annotated collection of these letters, and it invites the reader to walk alongside Rollin as he wades through the shocks of the war we waged upon ourselves and against ourselves. The pain and gore and glory of the Civil War are seen through Rollin's eyes, and we thereby become invested in seeing Rollin delivered home to fill the gaping hole his family felt with his absence. The narrative is bolstered by deep research into sources contemporaneous with Rollin's writings, and it illuminates the events that led to Rollin's metamorphosis from wide-eyed recruit to battle-tested veteran. Though Rollin mustered out disillusioned by the unseemly political machinations of war, he remained steadfast in his commitment to victory for the North. The book first examines the familial and community forces in Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania that shaped Rollin and naturally led him to enlist, and then uses Rollin's letters to guide the storyline. Over the course of his 2 years in the Army of the Potomac, he corresponded faithfully with his friends and family in Susquehanna County. Through his own words and additional supporting context about the military and political environment in which Rollin soldiered, the book chronicles events from the day Rollin swore his oath to the Stars and Stripes until the day he returned home on June 5th, 1863. There we go. I wanted to give you a flavor of some of the different letters and some of the different stationery that he used. You'll see from the beginning the colorful the red and blue, and it segues towards the end of his time to just slips of soiled paper. It feels quite remarkable in this day of texting and email to have the handwritten letters Rollin mailed to his family over 160 years ago. Today, the letters serve as a means to map the battles and the progress of the war. But more poignantly, they serve as a vehicle for tracing a young soldier's path as he survived each new challenge. Disease, numbing boredom in the army camps, homesickness, the terror and gore of combat, and the soul-wrenching anticipation of battle. On the cusp of manhood, they reveal notions of duty, honor, and patriotism. For the recruits, often away from their home communities for the first time, correspondence with loved ones reminded them of what they could return to, even as they withstood the unfathomable torments of war. Rollin's letters recount his experiences in the infantry while simultaneously reflecting the preoccupations of a young man. The first of his letters brimmed with enthusiasm as Rollin settled into the realities of his decision, and he proudly signed it, "Yours for the Union, R.B. Truesdell." As the war progressed and Rollin's eyes opened to the brutalities of what he saw and was expected to do and endure, Rollin took to closing letters to his parents, "Your affectionate son." Rollin's letters take the reader on a roller coaster ride of emotion. He was a clear, largely unemotional reporter of what he saw on such bloody battlefields as Gaines' Mill, Antietam, and Fredericksburg. But he also vividly described his day-to-day life as a soldier. His letters shine a light on the unbreakable bonds of comradeship born of shared war experience, even as he clearly ached for home and family. Rollin's letters bragging about the improvised Thanksgiving feast that he and his tent mate, William Westervelt, cooked in November of 1862 are a joy to read. Rollin wrote to his mother on November 20th, 1862. "My dear mother, though we are 7 days in advance of the time, we thought it best to make sure of the supper today while we can and give thanks the 27th, a thing we can more easily do than cook a supper if we are on the march. 5 o'clock. We have just ate our bountiful meal, which was very good, a number one. The goose we parboiled, then cooked in a kettle. We had the satisfaction of thinking it the best meal in camp, but best or second best, as the case might be, 'twas good." Letters describing the infamous dreaded Mud March of January 1863 and others in which Rollin shares his sorrow about leaving wounded comrades on the battlefield, knowing they would likely become prisoners or perish, leave an imprint on your heart. After the 7 days battles, Rollin wrote an extensive, detail-rich letter to his father of this experience. And I believe this letter exposes the heartache of war and the character of Rollin. I'd like to share the portion of the letter in which Rollin describes his escape after the Battle of Gaines' Mill. In camp, 2:00 p.m. The sun is pouring down upon us with all its fury, but I will endeavor to finish my letter and get it off in today's mail, which leaves at 6 o'clock this evening. When we left the battlefield, just in the edge of the evening, we left many of our dead and wounded behind us, expecting to be able to go back with ambulances and fetch them away, but quite a number fell into the hands of the enemy the next day. When I was leaving the field, I stepped over the body of a wounded soldier whom I recognized as John Merritt, whose widowed mother, I think, lives at Susquehanna Depot. He was wounded through the thigh. I lifted him up and tried hard to carry him off the field, but he was so exhausted from the loss of blood, he could not help himself at all. And after carrying him a short distance, I was compelled to lay him down. As he was a prisoner all of last summer after the Battle of Bull Run, I thought it more than a double portion for the poor fellow if left behind. Afterwards, I could not find him, and whether he fell into the hands of the enemy or not, I cannot say. A half mile to the rear of the battlefield, our brigade halted till 11:30 p.m. and then received orders to cross the river to our camp. At the time this order was given, I was enjoying a sound sleep neath a cluster of trees, and not being awakened was left undisturbed till morning. At daylight, I started for camp, and one of General Slocum's aides rode by and told us to hurry over the bridge, for it would soon be cut away. I started on at a quick pace and had proceeded but a little ways when I overtook a poor fellow wounded in the leg who belonged to the 14th Regulars. It being only a half a mile to the bridge, and the fellow only weighing about 130 pounds, I concluded to try and back him over or carry him, the way children call gooseback. Though it was a hard job, as I placed him safely in the ambulance. Though it was a hard job, his thanks as I placed him safely in the ambulance thrice paid me for the effort. I'm so struck by that letter, with rebels breathing down his neck at the sole exit to his unit about to be destroyed. He carried a man on his back for half a mile to get them both to safety. Rollin's letters, however, also reveal his sense of humor. In September of 1862, Robert E. Lee brought the war north, and Rollin was finally able to write to his father of a conclusive victory he was a part of, Crampton's Gap and South Binghamton. In Rollin's words, "Thank God we whipped them, even if it was a Sunday." And his letters also reflect a deep longing for peace. In one of his most memorable letters, Rollin wrote the following to his eldest sister, Julia, on March 26, 1863. Dear Sister Julia, I am anxious to have this terrible drama close and would willingly stand my chances for life or death in another 7 days' fight, another Antietam, South Mountain, and Fredericksburg, if I could feel sure that by another New Year's Day we could conquer and dictate terms of peace, which would be lasting and ensure prosperity and happiness to the nation for a term of years beyond which there can be no possibility of the present incumbents of the earth and sea. If only, right? One of Rollin's obituaries was titled "Final Bugle Call, the Death of a Prominent War Veteran." Another referred to him as a Christian gentleman with a strong influence for good. A street in Binghamton is named for Rollin. My great-grandfather, Arthur Truesdell, transcribed Rollin's letters in 1916. The letters and devotion to their preservation passed to my father. In 2001, Dad painstakingly retyped all of the letters to create digital files and added some accompanying detail about key battles in which Rollin and his unit fought. Dad passed some 120 letters that survived on to me. The envelopes depicted on the slide are from some of these letters. The one in the center of the screen is addressed to Clara E. Truesdell. Clara was the sibling closest in age to Rollin, and arguably the sibling closest relationship-wise as well. The affection they felt for each other comes shining through in the letters. For example, in the autumn of 1862, despite everything else Rollin was contending with, Rollin was preoccupied with ensuring Clara was able to buy the sewing machine she had her heart set on. He wanted to sell his prized watch to pay for it. Clara never married, and as an adult, she lived with Rollin and his family. And I believe it to be highly likely that she had a good hand in raising the children as well. I believe that Clara is the one who kept Rollin's letters together and then passed them on to my great-grandfather, Arthur. I'd like to rewind just a little bit now and tell you about the research process that I undertook to contextualize Rollin's letters. I will tell you that unlike my life generally and how things normally happen to me, I had quite a bit of luck in this process, as I had mentioned to you earlier. And I think you'll see what I mean as I describe some of these steps that I took. Of course, the first thing that I had to do was to do a detailed reading through Rollin's letters, the whole collection. And as I mentioned earlier, Dad had retyped them, and so in doing so, had categorized them into epics. I wanted to bring more granularity to Rollin's story, and so sketched out an alternative and a revised outline, which I talked through with my dad to gain his support. Some initial research shook loose some sources that neither I nor my father were aware existed before I began this project in earnest. Historians at the New York State Military Museum not only had an online archive with a whole section devoted to the 27th New York Volunteers, but also helped guide me to other primary sources, including the existence of the regimental history for the 27th New York Volunteers. Yep.
Which is in print.
It is in print.
Amazing.
Published in 1888, the lead author was Charles B. Fairchild, who was a good friend of Rollin's. In fact, in one of Rollin's letters to his sister Clara, he wrote that C.B. Fairchild wanted to thank her for the chevrons that she sent for Fairchild's uniform. The second incredibly beneficial discovery was the existence of a book called Lights and Shadows of Army Life. This book was published in 1886, and it was written by William B. Westervelt, Rollin's tent mate.
Oh, yeah.
Which is amazing. So Westervelt was just a fantastic storyteller with just a wonderful, wicked wit about him. He included various escapades with Rollin in his book. And I will also say, Westervelt did not pull any punches in his description of some of the military catastrophes that they both endured. So Westervelt and Fairchild lived side by side with Rollin. Who better to fill in the details about what Rollin was experiencing and how the troops were coping emotionally and physically? It was a real gift to have found that. And just to flip back very quickly, this image is of, as you can see on the titling, a photograph of Rollin, my great-great-grandfather, and William Westervelt in their later years. So even after the war, they remained very close, tight friends. Okay. So, standing on the same ground where Rollin stood during battle was also important to me. I toured all of the battlefields where he fought to absorb just as much as possible about what Rollin may have seen and felt. Where were the battle lines? What was his unit's approach into the fight? What was the topography like? Here's the bend in the Rappahannock River where he and his comrades crossed after the Chancellorsville thrashing, I thought. At Crampton's Gap, there would have been an almost vertical ascent to climb to reach the enemy. Some places, like Salem Church, looked out onto the trappings of modern day life, a mini mall. And it was really hard to visit. The relentless buildup of concrete kind of suffocating the solemnness of the sacred ground was the reality of modern life, and yet difficult to see at the same time. My trip to visit the Fredericksburg battlefield proved to be pivotal in accelerating and broadening my access to first-person accounts attributed to soldiers in the 27th New York Volunteers. The chief historian for the battlefield had, for his own personal interests, collected files from clippings of New York newspapers of letters that soldiers from the 27th New York Volunteers had submitted. He selflessly shared this treasure trove of sources with me. He also connected me with an absolute expert on the Battle of Antietam and Crampton's Gap, and who led me on a personal tour. This image is of the battlefield at Antietam. In the background is South Mountain and Crampton's Gap. Kind of hard to see the connection from just a photograph, but I wanted to just give you a visual of kind of the broad open expanse. And I will say, having Tom at the base of South Mountain, knowing precisely where Crampton's Gap and where the 27th specifically had to climb the vegetation, where they would have been grabbing to lift themselves up, was just an amazing gift to have. And I'm very grateful for that. And in November of 2019, I made an early research trip to Elmira, Binghamton, and Albany in New York, and Susquehanna County in Pennsylvania. My plan was to seek what local records there might be related to Rollin and the 27th New York at historical societies, municipal records offices, and libraries. In Binghamton and Montrose, they had specific folders titled Truesdell with information related to Rollin and our family in their files. And Montrose historians also shared a huge volume written in 1873 titled The History of Susquehanna County, which featured the Truesdell family. In Binghamton, I was shown an enlistment poster, which was from the time that Rollin volunteered and could well have been his enticement. In Elmira, the regimental rendezvous point, the lead historian at the Historical Society there pulled enormous boxes off a shelf that contained newspapers that were from the lead up to the war straight through till 1863, and they were mammoth. She shared with me also a schematic of Robinson Barracks, which is where Rollin did his training immediately before being sent into the military theater, right before the Battle of Bull Run. And in Albany, at the New York State Library, my mission was to relearn how to use microfiche and microfilm. And I will say it took a little. And clearly to find what other information I could about Rollin and the 27th. So I unearthed more newspaper articles from Rollin's contemporaries, including this photograph, which was taken right after they mustered out. That is the regimental flag from the 27th New York. Just a quick little point, right where that hole is where a star should be. It was shot out of the flag during the last battle that they fought in. The quick thinking color bearer scooped it up to ensure that it would be part of their legacy, and it was attached to this staff before deposited in the Bureau of Military Records. Other sources that I was able to glean from that time at the library included minutes from the 27th New York Survivors Association, and I learned that Rollin was the president and acting president of the association. All of these, wonderful tidbits. And there were some lovely accounts in the paper of Rollin giving lectures at the local high school about the Civil War. And apparently the kids so enjoyed his storytelling that they kept on wanting him to return. And I also found Rollin's obituaries there. And it was important for me to soak in what I could from where Rollin grew up. I was encouraged by my dad to track down the Truesdell homestead. And after some trial and a whole lot of errors, I finally did find it. The 2-story brick farmhouse pictured on this slide is where Rollin grew up, and the house stands today.
Still in this great repairing.
Sorry?
In this kind of good repairing.
It looks a little bit different now. That's an old brown and white photo from the era. which I was actually given by, yep. So I actually knocked on the door. And the current owner, she graciously invited me inside the house when she learned who I was. And it was a very moving experience, to be standing in the same house that Rollin wrote of lovingly from the battlefield. It was just quite an afternoon. She was something like an angel. She gave me the deed that I had mentioned earlier from 1822. The deed had been sitting in a closet, and she just ran upstairs and said, let me, she called her husband to confirm that he was okay with it. And she said, you must have this.
Wow.
It was just
Right?
Fantastic, fantastic.
And then she contacted the previous owners, who had the house before she and her husband bought it. So, Erica, when she learned about what I was doing and about my background, she mailed me this painting of the house that is artist unknown, and the two brown and white photos. So the brown and white photo came from Erica. And again, just extreme generosity.
Yeah.
And
So is it brick or wood?
it was a brick house.
Yeah, okay.
They did put shingles on it when I was parked in front of it, which was a little
And that was.
distressing, but
Yeah.
that is what it's, how they updated it. I also visited the tiny little cemetery just on the skirts of Liberty. And that is where Rollin's parents and grandparents are buried. And that was also, I have to say, very moving to be standing there. So beyond building upon foundational understanding of specific battles, I'm sorry, I'll rewind just a sec. Beyond building up upon a foundational understanding of specific battles and military leaders and political figures through lots of reading and research, my favorite authors in this regard, Stephen Sears and Bruce Catting. I reached out to the National Archive as well for Rollin's military records. They sent copies of his muster slips and his request for disability pensions. The slip that you see up there, as noted, is from his absence during the time that he was on recruitment duty. I also spent weeks reviewing the 70 volumes and the atlas of the War of the Rebellion, a compilation of the official records of the Union and Confederate armies. This is more commonly known as the official record. So it was a 21-year effort by the U.S. War Department to capture all of the commanders' official battle reports and the correspondence from during the war. I've got one more story for you. Yeah, it was
Thousands of pages, amazing.
Oh, it was a lot of.
Was it indexed well?
It was indexed. My final little story for you. And I think you will agree that this was a stroke of luck. I was flipping through a book by Don Troiani on Civil War uniforms. And I'm flipping through, and there it was, Rollin B. Truesdell's uniform.
He was obviously famous. I mean, there are all these records of him and.
Well, we didn't know this before starting with this project. So Troiani, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a famous military history artist who is known particularly for his Civil War battle scenes and how realistic they are. Hence, he collects uniforms. I found an email address for Troiani and sent a note explaining who I was and about the research I was doing around Rollin, and asked if I could please come to his studio to see the uniform. And to my shock, he responded within 15 minutes He explained, he explained that he no longer had a uniform. He has sold it as part of his collection to the US Army. He believed it would be part of their new museum, which was to be make sure I get this right, the National Museum of the US Army at Fort Belvoir. Again, a museum that at that point had yet to open. They'd taken over responsibility for preservation of the uniform. And so, of course, my attention turned to the museum. And after some sleuthing, I was able to connect with a museum curator, and he confirmed that, yes, indeed, they did have Rollin's uniform. Yep. And so even with the craziness of trying to prepare for the opening of the museum, the curator, facilitated my visit to their vast warehouse at Fort Belvoir so that I could spend time with Rollin's uniform. And that was in October of 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic as well. So it was well above and beyond the call of duty. And I have to say, it's really hard to express just how moving it was to be standing next to the clothes that my great-great-grandfather had worn 157 years earlier as he was fighting for the life of this country and his own life. I looked, there were the hand-stitched stripes denoting the rank of sergeant on his trousers. There was his haversack that he had stuffed with cake and ham and boiled eggs as he prepared to return to his unit after recruitment duty.
So did he like donated or like
There is such a long, that is another book
like
in the time.
like how did they get that? You know, like
So Troiani, there are so many interim steps in this. When I did a mini book tour in New York shortly after the publication of the book. SUNY Press published it. And Binghamton, of course, had to be one of the primary locations. Right before I was to start my presentation, a gentleman came up to me and said, "You are really going to be angry with me." And I just thought, I know, I just thought, I don't have any idea what this is about, and that's not something you want to hear right before you step up to speak. He came up to me afterwards and he told me that Rollin's uniform had been in his possession for a number of years. So that was another kind of side research project. How did Rollin's uniform get to Don Troiani? There was a Civil War artifacts dealer, I think somewhere in the interim, in the middle. The box that Rollin's uniform was in was labeled Newell and Truesdell. Rollin's first son owned a huge department store in Binghamton. And so the box was from that store. I think that maybe a grandson sold the uniform to a collector, could have been given to a teacher. There's a period of uncertainty about what happened. But I do have to say also, through all of the phone calling that I did, which even led me down to places in Florida to try to track it down, everyone was so kind and really wanting to try to help. So it's just
Well,
not
the identity of the uniform. I mean, that you know, I can understand people say, you know, stuff in a trunk, sell it, make some money at a thrift sale sort of thing. But the name, you know, whose uniform it was, and you know, that has gone, you know, been
It is pretty darn amazing.
Yeah.
And frankly, I was told by one of the curators at the warehouse at Fort Belvoir that there were really some unique aspects to the uniform, which probably is what piqued Troiani's interest. The slash pockets, for example, were not common. The brass buttons were very specific to that type of uniform from New York. Well, Rollin was a large man as well, and the size of the uniform. There were just various aspects that made it an interesting piece for a collector. And they, as you can see here, they laid everything out for me. And then were just so gracious. They then took me into the main part of the warehouse, which is it is just enormous. It includes artifacts from the Revolutionary War through to today. And they showed me the cabinet in which Rollin's uniform normally rests, so that I could have a better understanding where on a day-to-day basis it would be. And it made me feel grateful and just
Yeah,
very pleased,
yeah,
because it is in the best possible place for its preservation.
wait, is it made of wool?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yep. And you do hear in some of the stories about how that is in
Yeah,
the summertime in
summertime,
battle.
yeah.
So it was just an amazing day. And so I'd like to close and just say that, as you can imagine, immersing myself in Rollin's story and learning more about my family history really has been a privilege of a lifetime. And it's as if I found a part of myself that I didn't even know was missing. So with this book, I've been hopeful that it would encourage others who have their own packet of letters, their own history, to really dig deep and dig further to follow up on learning more about your family history is truly a powerful thing. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Well, you have it. Not everybody has an interesting family history like that.
Right.
I could dig into it, but it's not that interesting. My great grandfather was in the Minnesota first, but he was a German immigrant, and I think that was, sort of off the boat and more or less and into the Civil War. I don't. He was freshly into the US.
But I do have to say, as you can tell, like there were a number of slices of this onion kept on getting peeled.
Mhm.
And, when Dad and I first talked about doing this a bit, and I wanted to confirm, frankly, that he was comfortable with me doing this. We had no idea about Westervelt, about the uniform, it was just, there were just so many
Yeah.
new things.
Yeah.
So I guess I would say you just don't know
Yeah.
what, current generations might not consider interesting, as you said.
Yeah.
Here's an old uniform,
Yeah.
let's just sell it.
But the letter.
Yeah.
Survive.
Yeah.
Is just
Yeah.
All those years.
Yeah. They've been transcribed twice, so.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I also have Arthur's typed letters too, or my great grandfather's typed version. I think, there's just immense respect for Rollin, not just as a soldier, but as a man, as a human. He was just a very interesting, charismatic human being that family felt proud of and proud to be able to relate it to.
So you have all these fantastic artifacts, so they're in your possession, so who gets them next? Do you have somebody, they're going to another family member after you?
I'm looking to I think that the letters belong with his uniform, and I think for historical reasons, that is where they should go. I've been in contact with them. I'm concerned. I think the curator may have on. He was just delightful. He was so busy, but he was just so interested in this project.
Yeah.
And when I first started the writing, or early on in the writing, I was living in Maine, and he had hoped to come up for a visit to just see the letters in person. So in answer to your question, I really feel strongly that it's, I think for historical reasons and not just family reasons, it's important to do that.
So how long was the whole process? Like from when you started?
Yeah, so I'm gonna say like in the fall of 2019 is when I really just made the decision to go ahead and do this. I formerly worked with the US Department of State, and so I had kind of stepped back and felt like I really wanted to pursue this project that has, over the years just been so much on my mind. I worked hard to do it as quickly as I could. In the beginning of the writing, I would write a chapter, send it to my father, get his eagle eye editorial comments back, and then, revise. My goal had been to be able to hand a copy of the book to my dad. Unfortunately, that was not possible. So it really put a fire in me to get. I learned in it would be the summer of 2021 that SUNY Press wanted to pick it up and publish it, which was great. And even with the publication time, the original date that the acquisition editor had requested, I said, I think I can do that. I can do it quicker than that. I had to do some reorganizing of how it was laid out, but got it to him 6 months earlier than he had requested. So from I'm really in this to I've got a copy of the book in my hand, 3 years.
It's fast, I think. For me, this amount of research that you've done.
Well, and it was, we talked about the rabbit holes. Gosh, there were so many different areas that I really would have liked to have pursued further. But understood that you've got to make some decisions as to when you're.
Yeah.
But thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you for, did you want to continue on with his life after the war?
I was, there are some side stories in the book that I was intrigued about, that I wanted to learn more about the community life. And we talked earlier about what is it like on the home front when a loved one is fighting. And to me, it would certainly be interesting to know more about Clara, who, as you can probably tell, really, got to my heart.
Were there any of her letters left? Or
just that one from 1903, and I do have that one, which is so long. She was very comprehensive as far as what her memories were from that time, and how the war impacted the family and the community. So it was, she really provided real inspiration. And I am, well, two things. One other point I just mentioned, there are some wonderful maps, or at least I think that they're wonderful maps in the book, and they are from the Library of Congress. And they show the battlefields, and they're by Robert Knox Snet. These maps are works of art. They're color coded. They showed in great detail where the units were and how they moved. I would love to write about him as well, because I think being able to depict that as a cartographer in the middle of the battlefield would be just fascinating. So there are many more projects. But thank you for asking about that. Yeah.
So what's the Truesdell ethnicity? British?
English, Scottish. Yep. And it dates back to 1668. One of my second cousins, Huck Truesdell, and his wife, who I met through the process of doing this book, owns a bookstore in Worcester, Massachusetts.
Oh.
And they had also told me about the headstone of who is believed to be the first Truesdell, which is not too far from Worcester, Massachusetts. So when I went down to do a book talk at their bookstore, I stopped and saw this headstone. And he came from England. So deep history, both on my mom's side and on the Truesdell side, but that headstone was
So you have
Truesdell.
followed up the family genealogy in England. You need to go to finding your roots, huh?
My dad, in addition to all of his work on the letters, did a
he did?
huge family tree. He spent ages on that. I've got those binders as
Oh,
well. I so consulted.
So you've got the British or the English and Scottish ancestry back to
I do.
How far back?
I don't recall the exact date, but he went back to like the 1200s.
Yeah, probably in 1688. Shakespeare died in 1640, like 1604. I can't remember now. Early 1600s. Why can't I think of 1519, 1603 or something like that? So yeah, early 17th century. So that's nothing. You might your American roots are almost as old as Shakespeare. So
yeah. We've been kicking around here for a long time.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. So it's and Dad's genealogical research was of course a great springboard into learning even more detail, again contextualizing things. And along the way, as I mentioned, learning more about not just my great grandfather Arthur, but his brother Edwin, who was the one who owned that large department store in Binghamton, Rollin, Truesdell. And again, another wonderful discovery. When I did the talk in Binghamton, the head historian there, Roger, said, I have to show you something. So he took me into the room where several different records and artifacts were held. And don't you know, there was the Newell and Truesdell sign.
Oh yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. I admit I did ask, how much would that cost? And he said it's not for sale.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, fantastic.
so I feel very fortunate to be able to share this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, really interesting.
Thank you.
Great family history.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing your process and your book, and I hope more people do this. It's like, but to have that many letters.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It really was
amazing.
Amazing, yeah, and there was far more, of course, during the down times. Rollin was wounded towards the end of the war, and so there was a gap of time that he was unable to write. But yeah, very fortunate.
Yeah,
So thank you so much.
Our first speaker had 1,300
Oh.
from both the mother and the father, and I'm like, how did they keep those? Like, you're in World War II.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing.
so,
That's great.
yeah,
That is great.
yeah, to have that many, much
That would be a
material.
lot of
Yeah,
material. That
right.
would be 70 volumes worth
Yeah,
of the
you
war
bet.
record.
Maybe there were short letters.
That would be fine. But thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
coming and
Thank you.
sharing.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Thank you too.
Okay.